Welcome to another episode of The Common Babbler. Here we talk about what to teach and why, overall in science pedagogy in an undergraduate classroom. I'm Kalyan Chakrabarti, and I'm an associate professor of biological science and chemistry at the School of Interwoven Arts and Sciences, Krea University. And our guest today is Professor Bharath Sundaram. He's an ecologist and part of the School of Interwoven Arts and Sciences at Krea University. He's an associate professor. He's an ecologist who enjoys the interdisciplinary approach to explore and address challenges posed by the dynamism between environment and society. Before joining Krea University, he has been an associate professor in Nalanda University
Yep.
and also Azim Premji University before that. He holds a Ph.D. from ATREE, the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, and the Academy in ATREE.
Yep.
So welcome to the Common Babbler.
Thanks, Kalyan. Thanks a lot. I'm happy to be here and excited to discuss my work for the podcast and with you.
I know that you have long-standing interest in quite a few very interesting projects around environment. You have worked on human-elephant conflict. You have worked on tiger and prey monitoring, and the socio-ecological implication of alien invasive tree species in forests. I think the tree is lantana that you study.
Yep. Yep.
Currently, you are looking at the long-term monitoring of social ecological systems in Pulicat Lake.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a very interesting aspect of your work, and I think you had at different times you have worked, you have been funded. Your research has been funded by National Geographic Society and then International Foundation for Sciences Sweden and International Social Science Council France. So I will come back to it. There's a lot to unpack. I know that you are an avid photographer. So that's a hobby, or that's part of the profession that you picked up
It's
around
actually
the world.
part hobby and also part professional
Okay.
because I use a lot of visual cues in my classroom, and I'm also a strong believer in visual storytelling of science itself, right? Because the point is that we publish research articles in the written form, and we publish quite a few articles, right? And the onus is up to the reader to then consume this research or try to digest this complex research. Many times I found from experience that science communication is as key as science production, in the sense that it's fine if you've done really something really cool in terms of a research question or an idea or a hypothesis, but the communication of the results of that thinking is perhaps as or even more important. And visual storytelling is a method by which you can really make your research more accessible to a wider constituency. It's also a very, very good pedagogical tool in the classroom itself, because I can communicate much more about what I'm trying to say with one picture than I can do with multiple slides of text, maybe. So I'm very excited to not just pursue photography as a passion and a serious hobby, but also use it professionally in my work.
Okay, that's interesting. Would you say that your discussion about your work in a podcast format has some value which goes beyond the your output as an academic professional journal output?
Definitely, I would believe so, because I think part of the problem, not just in my field but in larger science, is again what I was referring to as who has access to your research. Right? So, for example, many of the journal articles I've written in the past, and some of them which are in review currently, are sometimes behind what is called a paywall,
Right.
which means that members of the public cannot access these papers without a subscription for which they have to pay money for, right? I believe that's not a good way of democratizing science, and I really think that people have become fatigued also by the written word, and are learning to learn more from other forms that are available in the popular media, whether it's a podcast or whether it's a mixed media article or even an Instagram post. All of these work equally reach out to to a wider audience. And that is really my main objective. How can I make my work? How can I make my work available to as large an audience as possible?
Fantastic. Also, I should mention that you were the faculty director of Krea and the IFMR Research Coordination Cell, and the Sundaram Fastner Associate Professor of Environmental Science Studies.
Yep.
So I like the sound of that.
It's a different company, though.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not my company. Let me make that clear.
All right.
If it was, then I perhaps would not be sitting here.
All right. All right. And then you also, so for your work, also you have traveled pretty extensively, but
Yeah.
also I know that as a hobbyist, also you like driving and probably biking.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Biking is probably past tense now.
Okay.
Motorcycling, rather. There
Motorcycling.
is
All
more
right.
more past tense.
Okay.
So if I were to analyze it now, I think my entrance into the field was because of a deep fascination for the Indian landscape
Okay.
and the diversity that it holds. So I remember thinking when I was quite young about how little of India I knew. So I was basically a city person who grew up in Chennai, never had much of an opportunity to travel as a child. Even if I would go, I would just go for a few days close by to Chennai and return. It was really in my after I turned an adult and after I started, nurturing this interest in ecology, that I began to be curious about the sheer beauty and diversity that is the Indian subcontinent. There aren't many subcontinents out there that show this kind of a massive diversity of landscapes, biodiversity, and social systems. It's truly fascinating, and I think even if I spend the rest of my life exploring, I would have barely scratched the surface.
Was the craziest place that you had been in your the most fond memories?
Oh, that would have to be, I think, North Assam, Upper Assam. I don't remember whether it was Dibrugarh or Tinsukia, one of these two. I was there with another colleague of mine who teaches in Krea University, Goa Dharmarajan. He was doing a survey on elephants. I was doing a survey on elephant-human conflict, and we
Mm-hmm.
were together with another researcher who was doing research on the pygmy hog,
Mm.
uh, or was it some other? I think it was some other ungulate species.
Okay.
So the three of us were crossing the Brahmaputra on a large ferry that had our old three-geared jeep
Okay.
that promptly broke down when we had to offload it from the ferry onto the riverbank,
Ooh.
right? And the riverbank was at a steep slope, so the vehicle had to go uphill to
Okay.
get off the ferry.
All right.
And it was in the end it took I think 20 people to push the jeep up a slope and off the ferry, and it was quite an exercise because the ferryman wanted to get on his way back as soon as possible.
I'm sure.
Jeep was stuck, it was not starting. It was a mess.
Where did the jeep come from?
It actually belonged to the Wildlife Institute of India,
Okay.
and this was the colleague who was studying the hog deer, not the
Right.
pygmy hog. I stand corrected.
Okay.
It's a species called the hog deer,
Okay.
which is found only in the Terai grasslands of Assam.
Okay.
It's quite a endangered species,
Mm.
or at least was at the time. I'm not sure about its current status. But the jeep belonged to her in the sense it belonged to the Wildlife Institute of India.
Then
And
this is in Dehradun, or
the Wildlife Institute is in Dehradun.
so you started driving from Dehradun to go to North
No, no,
Assam?
no. So Guha and I met her in I think Dibrugarh,
Okay.
and she had driven all the way from Dehradun in this three-geared vehicle. Uh, yeah, it is quite an
So
experience.
the jeep
Crazy.
came off the ferry, pushed up the hill,
By 20 people.
and then
And then we were just waiting till it got fixed. So we
okay.
were stuck there till it got fixed.
Okay.
Yeah.
But finally you could
No, no,
drive
that's
it.
not the end of the story. So even
Okay.
after it got fixed, the banks of the Brahmaputra are very, very sandy,
Sure.
and they have this technique where they put the fronds of the palms on the sand to give traction to all the vehicles who are leaving the ferry. Unfortunately, these fronds had disintegrated. So even after we got the vehicle started, we found our vehicle to get constantly stuck in the sand again. So that took another bit of effort to break it free of the sand.
Okay.
So by the time we got going, it was I think a solid 12 hours, later than planned.
And how were the studies subsequently?
It was fine. We spent a lot of time there,
Okay.
and the jeep kept breaking down.
Okay.
And the three of us were just learning to drive, so none of us knew how to drive the jeep ourselves. So there was a driver involved
Okay.
who would also go hooky, play hooky whenever he felt like it. So eventually, I remember we did part of the survey, and so the cane brakes of the terai.
Hmm.
Terai is a wet grassland,
Okay.
and it has these canes
Okay.
and reeds which are really really tall
Okay.
and also thick and mostly impenetrable.
Hmm.
So part of the survey we actually conducted on top of while sitting on top of a truck. So we had, instead of going on with this very very mechanically challenged jeep,
Right.
we decided to hire a truck for a couple of days instead,
Okay.
and we convinced the driver to take us through some of the parts of these grasslands, and we were perched on top of the truck on the roof.
And I'm
Which
imagining these places were chosen because they are sites for human-elephant conflict.
also, but there are also sites for the hog deer also.
Sure.
So it was a kind of a combination. But in the end, it turned out to be quite an interesting survey, must say.
I'm sure.
So
I mean, the
I
story.
remember I've used like 5 different modes of transport for these surveys. I did part of the survey on a bullock cart, part of the survey on a bicycle,
Okay.
part of the survey on top of a truck,
Uh-huh.
part of the survey, I think, on motorcycles of some kind, and then part of the survey on the Jeep.
Excellent. It's quite a story. So recently you have started studying the Pulicat Lake, and
Yeah,
probably you are one of the few people possibly studying the Pulicat Lake.
right.
So Pulicat Lake is this huge brackish water lake which is very close to the university campus.
Yeah.
So why did you choose Pulicat Lake?
Uh,
What drew you to Pulicat Lake?
this is a nice question because it takes me back to my formative years as a researcher as well. And I would like to spend some time on that, if it's okay. So, the idea of ecological systems being simultaneously social systems as well was the germ of an idea that probably led me to Pulicat now, in the middle of my research career. Right. So, I am broadly interested in what are known as environment society relationships. So, how do human beings look at the environment? What place does the environment have for human beings? And how do we dynamically engage with each other? Is my larger research interest. Within this larger research interest, I'm specifically interested in what are called social ecological systems. Right? These are also called coupled human and natural systems, or CHANs. And what is unique about this perspective is that we look at the social system and the ecological system as being coupled in a way. Coupled also in the sense that from a research perspective, you cannot focus on either only the social or only the ecological. So this form of research gained traction maybe around 2 or 3 decades ago, and has now come to dominate the way we look at nature, the way we look at biodiversity, the way we look at economics, environmental economics or ecological economics, and so on and so forth. So it forms a pretty powerful conceptual background or conceptual framework to view many aspects of current environmental, either tragedies or current environmental problems or current environmental tensions. And this was what eventually led me. So I did a little bit of research on social ecological systems in my doctoral work, and I built on the idea gradually. It took quite a bit of time, and I think my move to Krea University around 5 years ago kind of cemented it, because I found that I did not have the capacity to go back to my forest research,
Mm.
because the forests of the Western Ghats are quite far away from where I'm situated in Krea University. And at the same time,
But you can get a jeep that is not broken.
yes, I'm sure I can get a Jeep that runs well, but that's still going to take me 2 days to get there,
Okay.
and so on. And
Mm.
I've found that perhaps at a career trajectory that I'm at, you can't give 2-3 months of uninterrupted time to fieldwork anymore.
Okay.
And it really, I was racking my brains on what kind of a local context to research context to develop my future work in. And thankfully, Pulicat Lake is right there. It's the edges of Pulicat Lake are a 15-minute drive from our campus, and it began to kind of open itself up to me as I went to visit it more. Right, it's a very very complex, beautiful landscape socially and environmentally, and gradually I kind of have shifted most of my research activities to this particular social ecological context.
And I think one thing that is really impressive is that now you can work with undergraduate students on this research problem.
Yeah, yeah,
And you have also recently have writing a manuscript, or probably it is already submitted in a journal,
right.
which is entirely with you along with undergraduate students.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a project that we did last summer.
Okay.
And to just give you a very brief context of Pulicat Lake itself, it's India's second largest brackish water lake. The largest is Chilika Lake in Odisha. Pulicat Lake is also interstate lake, which means that 30% of the lake is in Tamil Nadu and 70% is in Andhra Pradesh. It's around 700 square kilometers large in at its peak water spread time, which is after the monsoon, and it shrinks down to around 350 square kilometers either at the low tide times or at the peak of summer, right? So it's a living breathing organism in that way. It's shape shifting as well. What's amazing about Pulicat Lake is that even now it supports amazing forms of biodiversity, including resident and migratory birds, a lot of mollusks, a lot of species of brackish water fish, many of which are, I would imagine that it's not been studied to the extent that it needs to be, and we might actually unearth either new species or lesser described species if we only search a little bit more. Right? So the biodiversity of the area is fascinating. The landscape is also linked to rivers upstream, because part of the brackish water lake is actually fed by rivers. And these rivers eventually start off from the Tirupati Hills,
Okay.
where in the Eastern Ghats, which itself is an endangered kind of ecosystem type. So this landscape is you also have agriculture, you have pastoralism, you have industrial activity, you have fishing activity, you have prawn cultivation or fish cultivation activity, and so on and so forth. So it's a very diverse kind of a landscape that way, and that was what got me really interested in trying to figure out how a social ecological system such as this one, with a lot of complexity, would behave over time, giving given the possibly conflicting use requirements. In the sense that it may be that the prawn fishers are managing the lake or looking at the lake from a different perspective than the agriculturalists are, or the pastoralists are, or the industrialists are. And overall, we can also examine how these kinds of land uses impact biodiversity, or what is the relationship between these forms of land use and the biodiversity that's present in the lake.
There's also an island, or probably a series
There's
of islands
several islands.
inside the lake
There's several islands in the midst of the lake,
and inhabited.
one of which is inhabited,
Okay.
and a couple of many. There are many temporary islands that become exposed when the water level is low, and inundate when the water level is high.
And those islands are administratively part of Andhra Pradesh or part of Tamil Nadu?
So the waters, around 70% of the waters belong to Andhra,
Okay.
and 30% to Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
And the lake mouth itself is in Tamil Nadu.
Right.
The lake mouths in the north of the lake in Andhra Pradesh have been blocked
Okay.
and silted, and that so this is probably the next level of factors that we should talk about. There are a set of broader environmental factors that impact the lake. For example, the amount of silt that is brought in by the rivers. If the silt can't get out through the mouth, then it starts accumulating in the lake. So there are reports of reducing lake depth over time.
Okay.
There are also, there is evidence for sediment exchange not being taking place between the ocean and the brackish water lake itself, which then connotes different productivity levels in different parts of the lake itself.
This happens during the tides. The
These happen either during
sediment
the tide or
exchange.
during the monsoon.
Right.
Right. So the third aspect then would be the salinity of the lake itself,
Right.
which changes within a year because of monsoonal rains. So after the monsoonal rains, you'll expect salinity to reduce.
Good.
and the salinity to gradually intensify as fresh water is lost through evaporation. Right? This is a series of environmental factors that will also impact the lake. If you go down to the southern end of the lake near the city of Chennai, in the place called Paraverkadu itself, you'll find that there are other issues at play like industrialization, pollution, and coastal regulation zone policy.
Okay.
So it's a very diverse landscape in that sense, and I've kind of appreciated this diversity for the sheer potential that it offers to do research.
Right.
And one such example was the one you referred to, a research project that I initiated with undergrad students last summer. So there were four students involved,
Right.
and we sat together, the five of us, and designed a piece of research that all of us could do work on. And I'm very happy to report that it's a manuscript that's currently under review, and let's see how that goes.
Fascinating. So in your paper, you speak about adaptive capacity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this is the adaptive capacity of the um, fishermen and women community, or of the nature as an ecological system. So what kind of adaptive capacity, or
So that's a great question. So this is so to give you a little background, adaptive capacity sits within what is called the resilience framework.
okay.
So overall resilience could be defined as the capacity of a system to return to its either original or undisturbed state after a perturbation of some kind. So let's say there is, for example, a cyclone event that occurs in the area, and the lake's banks breach, leading to a lot of inflow of saline seawater. What happens, right? Uh, that could be one aspect of resilience. But what you will study in response would be not just the environmental parameters of the lake itself, but also the social response of the people who live in the lake,
Right.
because they are also likely to be affected by this change in the environment. So, resilience would be looking at the capacity of a social ecological system to return to a state after it has been disturbed. There are many factors that affect resilience, one of which is adaptive capacity, which means that if a disturbance does occur, what is the capacity inherent in the system, socially and environmentally, that allows it to be resilient? Right? What is the kind of what we could call either factors that prop it up or support this return to resilience? That's what we mean by adaptive capacity. And we were also looking at adaptive capacity in the sense of land uses, not land uses, but ecosystem uses that may be uh, opposed to each other.
Okay.
Because this is a transboundary lake, this is an interstate lake, how fishers of one state may compete with another and therefore cause unsustainability in the system or the loss of adaptive capacity in the system overall. Both the people want to fish or to collect prawn, but the way they do it matters a lot. The way they, for example, have natural resource governance systems to arrive at some kind of an understanding of how much to take, when to fish, and so on, can create losses of adaptive capacity. Right. Another example I can give you is that the requirements that fishers have for fish is quite different from what the prawn collectors have for prawn. Prawn requires a set of conditions that may not be met by the conditions that the fishers want.
Okay.
Right. Similarly, they may not prefer. Nobody may prefer either the fishers or the prawn collectors may not like what the shell collectors of Pulicat are doing. So shell collection is another major livelihood route where calcium carbonate is produced from spats that produce these shells. And the collection is quite a skilled exercise that involves digging into the lake sand, creating a pit, and unearthing these shells, bringing them back to shore, refining these shells, and then selling the calcium carbonate for poultry factories as
For
feed
poultry.
for poultry, right? Because the poultry need a lot of calcium, and calcium carbonate is a additive in their diet. It forms a very important part of poultry feed. It's quite lucrative to produce naturally or collect naturally as opposed to factory-based calcium carbonate. Natural limestone is always preferred. Historically, natural limestone was also used in the construction industry as mortar.
Right.
And many of the shell collectors I've spoken to have told me that that industry collapsed a long time ago.
Okay.
But most of their stock is taken by the poultry feed producers. Right? Then you have a lot of people who are cultivating prawn in enclosures on the side of the lake.
Right.
And these are groups that are in conflict with all other groups because of arguably environmental damage being done to the lake itself. So the fishers and the prawn collectors don't particularly get along with the people who artificially cultivate prawn on the sides of the lake because they use lake waters because they need saline water or brackish water to raise the prawns in. But they also release back into the lake waters that are too rich in refuse.
Okay.
So that would be the fecal matter of the prawn, very organic rich water
Okay.
that will then impede nutrient dynamics within the lake itself.
Because it can give rise to algal bloom.
They can give rise to all kinds of eutrophication
Okay.
kind of effects, and the local people are very aware of these.
Okay.
Then you add to this the fact that the lake mouths in the northern part of the lake have been closed for the last half a decade or so, which creates a set of environmental conditions that are inimical to anybody making a livelihood in the long term.
So I don't know if you have a number for it, but do you think that the total economic activity, fishing, prawn cultivation, uh, and probably some water usage for farming,
Yeah.
maybe some secondary usage for poultry,
Yeah.
what will be the size in terms of number
Of the economy.
of the economy?
This is a great question, and this is actually our intention to decipher this kind of complex metrics.
Okay.
And I'm quite happy to report that I'm part of a very large interdisciplinary team that is examining exactly this in the context of the entire Pulicat Lake. So I'm part of the IFMR lead, which is leveraging evidence for access to development, which is a center for Krea, initiated a project in Pulicat around 3 years ago that wants to get at demographics and socioeconomics of the people who live around Pulicat Lake. Also very happy to report that this project has completed its first phase of data collection in the field, where we have collected data from around 2,500 households, around almost 7,500 people in total.
Very extensive.
Very extensive. It is a very, very systematic data collection format, which tries to get at how much people rely on lake resources, what are those resources, how much money are they making from those resources, what kind of money do they make doing other forms of work, what are these forms of work, how much is household income separated between male and female counterparts, etc., etc. So it's a very extensive data set that we are currently in the process of analyzing.
Okay.
I'm also very happy to report that this is going to be a edited volume of articles of such a kind that will hopefully appear next year.
Fantastic. That's really fascinating.
So I think these would be the combination of things that have happened uh, because of a couple of people's interest in Pulicat that very happily converged during the last 3 years. So people at IFMR Lead wanted to do something, I wanted to do something, and we figured out the funding and we figured out how to do it.
And probably there's not much of a historic reference simply because this is probably the first study of its
This
kind.
is really the first systematic study of its kind in
Wow.
the area.
Okay.
Right? We do have a lot of information in India from Chilka Lake,
Okay.
but not as much from Pulicat. Because a lot of things have changed. Some of the assumptions that we for example, thought were cemented didn't turn out to be so at all. So the initial results from our survey indicated that actually very, very few people in Pulicat primarily gain their income from fishing alone or from prawn collection alone, right?
Okay.
So we were under the impression that people belonging, for example, to the fishing caste
Right.
would largely gain their incomes only from fishing.
Okay.
It couldn't be farther from the truth.
Okay.
So even at a distance of 0 kilometers from the lake, right, which means they are households which are bang on the lake, Many people are earning only up to around 50-60% of their income from the lake itself. So they've diversified their livelihoods to an extent that they're not relying on on the lake alone. Uh, you know, and this was a fundamental kind of assumption that we had made.
So they go into farming, or they
They
go
go into
into
farming, they go into agricultural labor, they
okay,
go into construction labor.
okay,
Some of them, like many young people, have found regular salaried employment in the special economic zones around Pulicat Lake,
right,
of which there are many,
okay,
and so on.
okay,
So the initial, at least the few people I've spoken to over the last 3 years, have all indicated one thing quite consistently, that they do not see much of a future in gaining a livelihood from Pulicat,
mm,
given the amount of environmental change they've seen,
okay,
and that they would like their children to have a less risky, more stable livelihood form. It's also no coincidence, I think, because there has been an impetus on providing education
mm,
services to people
okay,
and to make education more accessible to people of this area. And I think it's a fundamentally a large impact of this educational access
right,
that has determined how people go out and get jobs
okay,
in salaried positions or
okay,
in semi-industrial positions, and so on and so forth. Because I've also noticed, for example, a higher participation of women in the workforce
okay,
in these areas
mm,
than we thought we would see. And
mm,
this is another focus of the book itself.
okay,
Another center of Krea called IWage,
mm,
which looks at what works for women in the economy,
mm.
are trying to focus on workforce participation and in the household, women's workforce participation.
So this whole area in is under the jurisdiction of the forest department.
Not really.
Okay,
So geographically, or rather policy-wise,
huh.
Pulicat is a wildlife sanctuary.
Okay,
Strangely enough, right? So it's
okay,
not called a bird sanctuary
okay,
because we don't have that bird sanctuary category in our Wildlife Protection Act.
okay,
So it can only be a wildlife sanctuary under the jurisdiction of the forest department.
okay,
So, and again, we are talking about the forest departments of two different states here.
mm-hmm.
Andhra Pradesh Forest Department will have their own group of people who are managing the lake,
Okay,
and Tamil Nadu Forest Department will have their own people who are managing the lake. But historically, both the governments of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh have had a kind of a tacit understanding that this is a social ecological system.
right,
That there are people, up to 15,000 people historically, who have fished in the lake,
okay,
right? And there has not been as much, I would say, uh, strict interpretation or following of the Wildlife Protection Act as seen in, let's say, a forest sanctuary,
mm-hmm.
as it has in Pulicat.
Okay,
And this I see as a good thing,
mm,
because historically this has always been a social ecological system
mm,
where human beings have not been separated really from natural resources.
okay,
The use of resources in Pulicat has always been there.
okay,
So it technically is, I think, also the fisheries department historically managed it, because
mm,
Pulicat was on the sides of the historical Buckingham Canal
mm,
that ran all the way from Vishakhapatnam to Chennai.
mm,
Historically, it was a
okay,
navigable canal,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of Pulicat's history has been shaped by this navigable canal,
Mm,
because goods from Pulicat were loaded onto boats into the Buckingham Canal. In some areas of Pulicat, the Buckingham Canal runs dead on the side, right? Almost parallel to the side of the lake. In fact, you can actually see the Buckingham Canal flowing in some parts of the Pulicat landscape.
Does it go all the way to Visakhapatnam
No,
still?
it's been broken now,
Okay,
so it's no longer navigable, and it's been broken in multiple places.
okay, but it goes south in Chennai.
It goes, I think, a little south of Chennai as well.
Okay,
I'm not quite sure where it ended.
okay,
I need to find out.
okay.
But I know for a fact that it ran at least from Vishakhapatnam to Chennai in one single unbroken channel.
Oh, that's pretty
So
impressive.
it determined trade relations and agrarian relationships and local ecology and local sociology for the longest time.
Pulicat had history of people and economic activity in that area
Yeah,
from way back
from way
in
back. From way back, we're
even
talking about Dutch colonization, We're talking about 7th century, 8th century traders
Okay.
from multiple parts of the world. I think Chinese pottery has been found.
Okay.
So it's a very, I think ports in India
Huh.
have always been exchanges in a
Hmm.
sense,
Hmm.
right? What we would refer to as a exchange right now,
Right.
where people came, goods came, uh, knowledge came, all
Right.
of that. Historically and sociologically and culturally, Pulicat is fascinating. It's been known, for example, for its checkered cloth
Hmm.
that the Muslim weavers would produce
Hmm.
for the longest time.
Hmm.
Dutch traders would come to trade only in checkered cloth, which they refer to as Pulicat checkered cloth.
Really?
Yeah, in the literature.
Okay.
It was very valuable, and there were a whole group of people who were weaving this checkered cloth.
Hmm.
The Dutch also traded in slaves in Pulicat.
Hmm.
So it was also a slave trade kind of a destination, or rather a stoppage, a transit point in the Dutch slave trade
From here
historically.
to Indonesia,
From probably here back to Southeast Asia
Southeast
and
Asia.
back.
Okay. Okay.
So there's some reports of that as well.
So what you mentioned is about 15,000 people, and from your study, you think that maybe the number is slowly dwindling.
It's surely dwindling.
Okay.
And I think when we analyze our data a little bit more in detail, we can arrive at how much this landscape has changed
Okay.
and how much the livelihoods within this landscape has changed.
Any of this is accelerated by the presence of big industrial zones and also the thermal power plant, which is very close to the
Yeah.
Pulicat
So the
Mount.
southern end of Pulicat, like I said, has historically been the industrial center for Tamil Nadu.
Right.
So the city of Madras, then later Chennai,
Hmm.
has always had industrial centers in that area.
Right.
Uh, and that is exerting a bit of quite a bit of environmental pressure on the area.
Hmm.
But leaving aside these very specific things that are changing the environmental parameters of the lake,
Hmm.
when you speak to the people who live in and around the lake, and this is again going to fit into adaptive capacity, the framework itself,
Hmm.
they are basically trying to balance risk and reward.
Hmm.
They are basically trading off high risk, high reward situations for slightly lower risk, low reward, but stable situations. Right.
Hmm.
So many people have told me, for example, prawn collectors, prawn pickers have told me that on a day I would go, I would earn up to 20,000 rupees or 30,000 rupees
Hmm.
just in a day. On some days I would go out and work for 8 hours and I won't find a single prawn.
Okay.
So this kind of unpredictability is something that people have become very wary of,
Hmm.
given the development of the economy overall.
Hmm.
They would like to reduce their risk.
Right.
They would like to reduce their fluctuation in income,
Hmm.
and they see salaried employment as a way through it.
Right.
The other thing is that either fishing or prawn picking or shell collection are all high risk situations also in terms of physical health.
Right.
This is very labor intensive.
Hmm.
These are labor intensive forms of making a living.
Right.
And many of the fisher people I've spoken to are very cognizant of this.
Hmm.
And almost consistently, they've all said that this is not the kind of life that we would wish for our children.
Right.
And we would prefer our children to be in salaried forms of employment that are safer, more dignified, and so on. Because again, one more part of the book, one more chapter in the book is going to be about market linkages and value chains.
Hmm.
And Pulicat is no different from many other parts of India in the sense of how you look at last mile linkages,
Hmm.
last mile connectivity.
Hmm.
So even though you are having the capacity to collect very high quality prawn for the
Right.
market,
Hmm.
the value that you gain out of it is reduced because of poor last mile connectivity.
Hmm.
Right? So you're losing a lot of value in the product because you're unable to transport it to the nearest market center.
The
And
lack
you
of good roads.
lack of good roads. So you're relying on somebody else to do that for you. The minute you rely on somebody else to do that for you, you're going to take a cut in price.
Hmm.
Right? You're not going to be offered as much as you should be.
Is it a problem that because it's a wildlife sanctuary, so also the road construction possibly is limited by
Yeah.
policy
Yeah.
also?
So road construction within the area is generally impeded by protected area policy.
Okay.
This is a complicated one because many fishers have told me that roads are bad for prawns as well.
Really?
Yeah. So the key aspect to prawns, I think, reproductive cycle is that their ability to track nutrient-rich sediments to eat in.
Okay.
Right. So they are filter feeders largely. They're bottom sediment feeders. They
Right.
sit at the bottom and they eat
Right.
organic content. And they have this ability to track rich food patches.
Okay.
And many prawn pickers have told me that the roads impede in this movement, in this free movement,
Okay.
in their search for nutrients. Because they are, they are linear intrusions in that sense, that show in ecology what would be called an edge effect.
Okay.
Their effect is disproportional to their size, and so on and so forth. So it is an issue. Roads are a complicated issue, and this is another reason why I like research in social ecological systems,
Right.
where clear cut answers are or clear cut solutions are not that easy to find.
Right.
It's highly nuanced, it's highly complex, and it makes life as a researcher, I think, quite exciting.
It was fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, and I really hope that the work is published very soon.
I hope so too.
All the
I
best
hope so
for
too.
that.
We shall pray to
So,
the editorial gods
right.
to make that happen.
Well, editorial god. Okay, thanks a lot,
Thanks, Kalyan. This was a
and
pleasure.
thanks for coming. And it was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, audience, and this is the end of this episode, and we'll be back with a new episode of the Common Babbler.